Thank you very much, Mr. President. Um, I have many people to thank as we bring this conference committee compromise to the floor of the Massachusetts Senate. First of all, the Senate President and her staff. This has been, as the Minority Leader just so eloquently explained, been an arduous process, an incredibly complex bill. The General Counsel to the Senate, Jonah Beckley, has been an inestimably valuable partner. We couldn't have done it without him. And I'm appreciative to the Senate President and to Jonah for bringing us where we are today. And the Senate Ways and Means Committee and Counsel to the Senate has made sure that we're in the proper parliamentary position. Wouldn't be good if we weren't. I want to thank my fellow conferees of both branches and of both parties. This really was a bipartisan effort. I can appreciate that the Minority Leader just expressed his disappointment with the parliamentary situation. I would beg to differ with him. But more importantly, I want to compliment him. He really was a source of insight here and a source of advice right along as recently as yesterday morning, when a number of issues were unresolved and might have remained unresolved had Senator Tarr not stepped up to help. I want to thank Senator Cream and her staff for being there at every turn. This, as Senator Cream could tell you, has been a tough experience for everyone in both branches, and she has been the perfect ally for me as I've struggled to bring this bill to you all today. I want to thank House Chair Roy and the House staff of TUE. I couldn't have asked for a better partner, and having just listened to his speech on the floor of the Massachusetts House, I can tell you that I don't have to go into great depth about the importance of offshore wind. As critical as it is, no one could summarize better the value of our pursuing offshore wind, and I would commend his floor speech to all of you who might be interested in the issue. I want to thank my own staff. We were working until 12:30 a.m. this morning. I could not ask for a better group of friends and colleagues and staff. Brendan and Lexi and Abigail and Audrey and Evie, my heart goes out to you, and I am so grateful to you, as you know I am. I want to thank the advocates for keeping the fire lit at every turn. And with respect to the membership of the Senate, Mr. President, I want to single out the members of the South Shore and North Shore delegations, the folks who represent Somerset, Fall River, New Bedford, Taunton, who represent Salem, and of course Gloucester, because their interest in offshore wind and in the job creation potential that it represents really was instrumental in bringing us to where we are today. You know, the climate issue in its particulars is dauntingly complex, and yet the way forward is disarmingly simple, stated in very general terms. We have to green the grid, make sure that the juice that keeps the lights on and drives the equipment for the country, the state, and the world is as emissions-free as we can possibly make it. And once we've greened the juice, well, we've got to run it through every car and truck and mass transit vehicle in Massachusetts, in the country, and in the world. And we've got to run it through every building. So at one remove, the path ahead of us is clear, and the call to action is simple. Green the grid, and then run that electricity, that clean power, through our transportation systems, our building systems, and our industrial processes, and we've got the climate problem licked. So now that we know just how exquisitely clear our mandate is, let's talk about this bill before us. The Senate did range broadly over the climate policy landscape because they're hearing so many requests for help and expressions of concern from their constituents. So if we're to match the level of concern on the part of the people we represent, we've got to think as wisely and as ecumenically as we possibly can. So we took a look at the clean energy sector because, remember, the first imperative here is to green the grid. This bill does a number of things, and again, I would commend Representative Roy's terrific description of the importance of offshore wind to all of you. I will merely say that much of the Senate effort over the course of the last several months has involved fine-tuning the very dense and complex language around procuring offshore wind generation, setting up the windmills in the ocean, basically. Very tough to run that process in a way that guarantees a good outcome, and that means generating a lot of electricity, but it also means minimizing costs to ratepayers. At every turn, the Senate has tried to ask the question, who pays? Who pays for the enormous expense we now face in tackling this problem? I think we've set the right balance, but it took an enormous amount of work. Connected to this issue of offshore wind generation is the question of transmission. Once the windmills are whirring, how do you wheel the power onto land and then distribute it around Massachusetts and, of course, really around New England, because we have a New England-wide grid, a shared resource among the 6 New England states. How does that happen in a way that enables each of us to plug in local solar systems, local network geothermal systems, onshore and offshore wind resources? How do we make sure that the grid is resilient enough and robust enough to wheel those electrons all around the region? Very tough to do that at the same time that you've got to make sure the sources themselves are clean. So we do go beyond offshore wind. We did go beyond offshore wind in the Senate because we know that there really are 3 or 4 critical pieces to this green grid problem. Solar got a lot of our attention, and I want to credit my colleagues in the Senate for being critical pieces of the solar industry problem to us. Solar is struggling in some ways. We have a shortage of person power, a shortage of folks who can get up on the roof and install solar panels. We have a shortage of industrial scale solar sites. So we do a number of things. And here, all these ideas, by the way, began in the Senate. This was an issue that we took on. How do you make sure that solar is as robust a part of the solution as offshore wind? Because you need both. And so we eliminate the so-called donut hole, which is a key missing gap in the way that we enable people to net meter when they have panels on their roof. There is a gap in which the subsidies fall away. It made no policy sense. It was an early concession, I think, to anxiety on the part of the utilities. The gap needed to be bridged, and we've done it. We've eliminated the so-called donut hole, which allows Class 1 solar systems up to 25 kilowatts uniformly to be exempt from limits on net metering. We also loosened the so-called single parcel rule. There's an odd rule that exists that says essentially that if you've got a college campus or a hospital or a big farm for that matter, and you've got panels on the barn roof, you can't put panels 2 years later in the back field or on the roof of your house. Net metering has been limited for years to augmenting or to rewarding only the first solar installation on any given parcel. And we've loosened that up and made it more realistic so that people can iteratively contribute to the greening of the power system. We even create a special pollinator-friendly solar incentive so that we put panels onto agricultural land and onto open space, but in a way that rewards installations that are friendly to the creatures that pollinate our plants and keep the cycle of rejuvenation going. So we've been very thoughtful, we hope, with respect to fully fledging the power of solar and enabling it to contribute just as offshore wind must. Now, I will tell you that the Senate also took an an interest in the legislatures being visionary. So we added language, it started here, to make sure that the Mass Clean Energy Center can begin to take a look at fusion energy. We've got one of the breakthrough corporations on the planet with respect to fusion, operating in Devon's and Senator Eldridge's district. We wanted to bring solar fusion energy, into the family of clean energy alternatives that we nurture here. And in a similar way, we authorized the Mass Clean Energy Center to pay a lot of attention to network geothermal energy. We've got some fascinating pilots going on right now, and we want to make certain that the Mass CEC, even as it focuses on offshore wind and on solar, starts to think about the future, which may very well be embodied in fusion energy and networked geothermal. But once we green the grid, again, the question is, how do we run that green juice through buildings and then through transportation? A signal contribution from the Senate is going to allow that survived in this bill is going to allow 10 communities in the state to go fossil-free on new construction and substantial rehabilitation if they elect to do so. And we wanted to make sure that we balanced all the considerations that have been raised by thoughtful people on this issue. And so we do require that as a condition of a given community electing to go all electric in new construction, that the same community first meet its 10% affordable housing target set by state law chapter 40B. We want to promote housing in the suburbs or in the cities, but at the same time, we want to green the housing stock, especially going after the low-hanging fruit, which is new construction. The data from the Baker administration, it's important to remember this, the data commissioned from the Baker administration show that you can build an all-electric home in the state of Massachusetts for less money than you can build a fossil fuel home. And the brokers, the developers and the builders, we hope are going to pass those net savings on to the buyers. And that's what the analysis from the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs demonstrates, that if you can give the builder a break by going all electric, saving her money, passing the savings on to the buyers of the homes, everybody makes out, and the planet makes out beautifully as well. So we're extremely proud of that experiment. I should mention to you that in addition to requiring these towns to be very sensitive to the need for affordable housing, we also do specifically exempt life sciences labs. We appreciate that the life sciences are the lifeblood of much of the Massachusetts economy, and we want to make sure that this very important experiment in all electric doesn't get in the way of a handful of buildings, relatively speaking, in Massachusetts needing to operate 24/7, 365, medical buildings, hospitals, and life sciences labs. If I could go on just a little bit with respect to buildings, because it was very important to the people in this branch, we're taking a look, and it all originated in the Senate bill, at the future of gas. We're not going to meet our emissions reductions goals unless we are able to wean ourselves off a fossil fuel that, as I speak, is providing something like 50% of the driving, about 50% of the electricity turbines that are keeping the lights on and keeping the air conditions going. And also, natural gas serves to keep us warm in our home heating systems in wintertime. We're dependent on natural gas, and yet we cannot survive as a planet unless we move away from natural gas. There was an all-important proceeding, it's still going on the future of natural gas, Mr. President. And we ensure in a key provision of this bill that this all-important inquiry into the future of natural gas will continue into the tenure of the next governor of Massachusetts. We appreciate the work that's been done thus far by the Department of Public Utilities and the Baker administration, but this critical question will also benefit from the attention of the next governor. So there's a key little provision in this bill that took a lot of time to negotiate to make sure that this crucial interrogation into the future of gas will continue and won't be prematurely foreclosed. Let me talk about another provision. I'm sorry to get so granular here, but we've got to appreciate how many moving parts there are. We provide in an idea that a provision that originated in the Massachusetts State Senate that mass save cash incentives will no longer be available in the next 3-year mass save plan to buttress the installation of fossil fuel infrastructure in buildings, except as a backup for an electric heat pump. So we're saying that some folks may stick with natural gas, and we respect their choice, but we're not going to use ratepayer dollars to subsidize the perpetuation of fossil fuel infrastructure when we know that the all-electric option is now right where it needs to be to keep people warm in a cold weather climate. One final thing I want to mention with respect to buildings, again, it's critical. We've got a gas pipe replacement system that is crucial for avoiding gas leaks from aging infrastructure, but at the same time serves inadvertently to perpetuate natural gas infrastructure for decades to come. It's time we revisited the so-called GSEP program. We have to figure out how to strategically and selectively wean ourselves away from constantly upgrading natural gas infrastructure when we will need to walk away from natural gas in several decades, or I should say, substantially reduce our dependence on it. So you can begin to appreciate how focused we've been in the Senate. I want to move from the decarbonation of buildings. I've only scratched the surface of things we're attempting there, to the decarbonization of transportation. We have we've codified for the very first time, and this idea originated in the Senate, thanks to many of you, we put into state law for the very first time the EV subsidy programs, which have existed as a kind of stepchild, supported from budget to budget, rather precariously. We're now building a legal statutory home for our EV program. We increase the rebates that we give for the purchases of clean vehicles. We add an additional rebate, Mr. President, for low-income customers because we want, finally, these darn things have got to become affordable to a middle-class family, a working-class family, and to poor folks. For the same reason, we authorized the rebates be extended to used EVs and not just to new ones. We're pushing the idea of point-of-sale rebates so that when you show up at a car dealer or you buy your electric vehicle online, you immediately realize the savings that I'm now talking about here when I talk about subsidies. We extend the subsidies as well to medium and heavy-duty trucks. We can appreciate that we're not going to get too far if there are trucks rumbling through urban neighborhoods belching diesel. We're going to have to find a way to address that commercial fleet problem in order to clean up the air in urban neighborhoods particularly, but as well the air for all of us. We define zero-emission vehicles for the first time. We get serious, too, about another aspect of this EV problem, and that's tackling range anxiety, right? In this bill, buried in this bill, is the most ambitious effort mounted in any state that I know of to make sure that, well, we're trying to emulate California. I want to give California its due, but the idea is to really propagate chargers so that range anxiety doesn't become a factor that limits the purchases of electric vehicles right from the get-go. You're going to like what we've done in a very granular way with regard to charging. And where is all this going? Another provision of this bill, originated in the Senate, bans the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles beginning in the year 2035. This is a commitment already made by the states of New York and California. What we're signaling to the market, as well as to our own consumers, is that all this EV stuff is aimed toward turning over the fleet in a way that greens the fleet. So we're setting a very ambitious effort to get there, to get to a green fleet in terms of newly purchased vehicles. I mean, the older ones are going to stay on the road for quite a while. But in terms of new sales within Massachusetts, we need to go green. But we're all mindful, Mr. President, that this cannot be about the electric vehicle used by the individual family, and in particular by the individual family of means. So we balance our commitment and our interest in ZEVs, zero-emission vehicles, by our interest in greening the T. A critical provision of this bill that originated in the Senate is that we require that all new MBTA bus purchases and leases be zero-emission vehicles themselves by the year 2030. And we set a further goal. It's an ambitious one, but we've got to get there, especially in order to protect low-income and urban populations. We do require that the entire MBTA fleet be zero-emission vehicles by the year 2040. We require at every turn, as the MBTA makes capital planning decisions, that considerations of greenhouse gas emissions reductions be factored in to those decisions in a much more pivotal way. So you're going to see language in the heart of this bill that changes fundamentally the MBTA capital planning process with regard to its rolling stock. A fourth focus of the bill, and I'm about to conclude, you'll all be relieved to know, is that we are very concerned about the impact of all of the above: greening the grid, running the green juice through the building sector and the transportation sector. We are very concerned about the impact of all of the above on ratepayers throughout Massachusetts and on vulnerable communities in particular. So we've taken a number of steps. One of them is that we remove biomass as a defined renewable energy generating source that qualifies for inclusion in the Massachusetts RPS program. That's a lot of verbiage I just threw at you. But fundamentally, it's time to stop subsidizing dirty electric power of the sort that threatened Springfield, Massachusetts, quite notably, and still threatens it to some extent. We are removing a key underpinning of industrial scale biomass, and people are going to take heart from our having done that. We also make sure that as we give out tax incentives to draw new companies into Massachusetts in the offshore wind sector, we want to make sure that those tax breaks really go to create legitimate blue-collar manufacturing jobs. I want to express special gratitude to my colleagues in the House on the conference committee. This thinking originated in the Senate, but they were receptive to it. We stipulate that any tax break, any so-called tax expenditure of the sort that we should ordinarily be quite wary about, that it be given only to companies in the offshore wind space, and I'm quoting now from the statute, likely to contribute substantially to the manufacture, fabrication, and assembly within the Commonwealth of domestic supply chain components of the offshore wind industry. Now that's pretty windy, that's pretty multisyllabic, but here's what I want to reassure my Senate colleagues. These tax breaks are not going to be handed out profligately. We are not going to see the kind of scandals 10 years from now that have afflicted the use of tax incentives and tax loopholes in other areas of commerce in the state occasionally and sometimes in the country or the world. We're really targeting these breaks to bona fide reintroduction of manufacturing capacity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And they are not going to be used unless they materially give people jobs in a manufacturing sector of the sort that the state does desperately need. So we have finally marbled throughout the statutory language, Mr. President, attention to low-income communities, to environmental justice communities, and we've insisted at every turn, again, that protections and thought be extended to the ratepayer. Because here's the trick here. The latest thing to happen with this bill, the latest turn it took, had to do with the arrival of inflation, something that is changing the politics of the country and more importantly, the choices of individual families throughout the country, the state, and the world. We took note of the arrival of inflation, and we asked ourselves the question, again, at every turn, who pays for all of this? There was a lot of very complex questions about cost allocation arose. I am pleased to say that I believe they've been dealt with quite effectively. There are questions of cost allocation between the ratepayer and the developers of these offshore wind sites, or for that matter, of industrial scale solar. And then there are different questions of cost allocation as between the ratepayers of Massachusetts and those of the rest of New England. One of the things that presented to us at every turn was the prospect that Massachusetts ratepayers would pay to modernize a grid that benefited all of New England, and that there would be a kind of free rider effect extended to the residents of our friends in the other 5 states. This bill took very careful note of the complex cost allocation questions presented to a region which seeks to tackle its energy problems collectively. And I think we've addressed those questions of cost allocation in a way that protects the people that you all represent. And that is a theme, I'm pleased to say, that originated in almost, in very large part, in the Senate bill, and that we now find expressed in the bill you've got before you today. So, my apologies for an extended presentation here. I can tell you that this has been a difficult and interesting voyage. We've arrived at a very good place. I am extremely happy with the product that we've got to present to you. I am grateful to all of you for your patience and forbearance, and I hope that we give this conference committee report a very strong affirmative vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen.